Today we're going over IRS Form 2441, Child and Dependent Care Expenses. A couple of things before we go through this two-page tax form that you should be aware of. Um, First of all, this tax form is for taxpayers who paid someone to care for their child or another qualifying dependent so that the taxpayer and the taxpayer's spouse, if filing a joint return, could look for work or actually work in the given tax year. If this applies to you, you may be able to file Form 2441 in order to claim a tax credit for those expenses. Also, if you or your spouse received any dependent care benefits for the tax year, you must use this form to figure the amount, if any, of the benefits that can be excluded from income. And finally, if you or your spouse, if filing jointly, have earned income to take the credit or exclude dependent care benefits from your income, you must have earned income in order to take this credit. But if you or your spouse was a student or disabled, either of those circumstances have additional considerations that you should probably look into using the form instructions. This video, we're simply going to walk through the form itself step by step. So at the top of the form, your name as shown as on the tax return will go at the top along with your social security number. If you're using tax software, it'll automatically do this for you. Generally, if you are married but filing a separate return, you cannot claim a credit for child and dependent care expenses unless you meet certain requirements, which you may find in the IRS form instructions. But generally, if you lived apart from your spouse during the last 6 months of the tax year, if your home was the qualifying person's main home for more than half of the year, and if you paid more than half the cost of keeping up that home in the tax year, then you can be treated as unmarried and take the credit or the exclusion. If you don't meet all of the requirements to be treated as unmarried, you can't take the credit, but you might be able to claim the exclusion if you meet certain tax items. You'll need to refer to IRS Publication 503 for more specific guidance. Before we go through this tax form, we should probably cover a couple of key definitions. So the first definition I'd like to cover is dependent care benefits. According to the IRS, those dependent care benefits may include any amounts that your employer paid directly to you or your care provider, the fair market value of care in a daycare facility provided by your employer, or pre-tax contributions that you made under a dependent care FSA, flexible spending account. A qualifying person is any qualifying child under the age of 13 that you can claim as a dependent. If the child turned 13 during the tax year, then that child is a qualifying person for the part of the year he or she was under age 13. So if your child's birthday was June 30th, then your child would be eligible for half of the year. And then the other category of qualifying person is any disabled spouse who wasn't physically or mentally able to care for himself or herself and lived with you as the taxpayer for more than half of the year, or any disabled person that lived with you for more than half of the year and whom you could claim as a dependent, or you actually do claim as a dependent. If you could claim that person as a dependent, but their income was too high, they filed a joint return, or you could be claimed as a dependent on another taxpayer's return, you still may be able to use this form to claim a credit, but you really should talk to your CPA or tax preparer before you try. So we're going to go through this form. Part 1 is persons or organizations that provided the care. So you must complete this part. And if you have more than 1, 2, 3 care providers, you should check this box up here at the top right corner of part 1 and follow the instructions. But generally, you're going to provide the care provider's name, address, their identifying number. If this is a person, that would be their social security number. And if it's an organization or a company, it will be their employer identification number. Column D addresses whether or not this care provider was technically a household employee in the tax year. So that might be a nanny, but not necessarily a daycare center. Could be a nanny that also provided housekeeping services, for example. And then also the amount paid. If you received dependent care benefits, then you'll need to complete part 3 before going to part 2. If you did not receive dependent care benefits, then you'll go straight to part 2. We'll just assume that you did receive dependent care benefits. We'll go to part 3 and then we'll circle back up to part 2. Under part 3, starting with line 12, you're going to enter the total amount of dependent care benefits that you received in the tax year. They should include amounts that you received as an employee. They will be in box 10 of your Form W-2. Do not include any amounts that were reported as wages. And if you were a self-employed individual or a partner in a firm, you should include the amounts that you received under a dependent care assistance program from your partnership or sole proprietorship. Line 13, you're going to insert any amounts that were carried over from previous tax years. And if you carried over any amounts into a future tax year, you're going to enter that on line 14. So then you combine lines 12, 13, and 14, 14 being a negative that you'll need to subtract to come to line 15. Now, in line 16, you're going to enter the total amount of your qualified expenses incurred in the tax year for the care of that qualifying person. So these amounts, 12, 13, and 14, are the amounts of the benefits that you received. Line 16 is the total amount of expenses that you actually incurred. And then on line 17, you're going to enter the smaller of those two sums. And then on line 18, you're going to enter your earned income. Under line 19, you'll enter the amount that applies to you. So if you're married filing a joint return, you're going to enter your spouse's earned income. Although if your spouse was a student or disabled, you'll need to refer to the form instructions to see what number you put in here. If you're married filing separately, you'll need to refer to the instructions. And then everyone else, if you're head of household, single, qualifying widow or widower, then you'll want to enter the amount from line 18. And then on line 20, you'll simply enter the smallest number out of 17, 18, or 19. For line 21, you'll enter the number $5,000 if you're married filing separately, and you were required to enter your spouse's earned income on line 19, you'll enter $2,500. If you entered an amount on line 13 up here, then you're going to add that to the 5,000 or the 2,500 and put that all under line 21. But do not enter more than the maximum amount allowed under your dependent care plan. Is any amount from 12 or 13 from your sole proprietorship or partnership? If yes, enter the amount in line 22, and then for line 23, you'll subtract that amount from line 15. If that's not applicable to you, then you'll enter 0. Line 23 will be the same number. Deductible benefits. That's the smallest of line 20, 21, or 22. This will also be the amount that you include on your appropriate line of your tax return according to the instructions. Excluded benefits are benefits that are excluded. If you checked no on line 22, then you'll enter the smaller of line 20 or 21. Otherwise, subtract line 24, which are the deductible benefits, from the smaller of those two. And if this number is 0, then enter 0. Taxable benefits, you'll subtract line 25 from line 23. If this number is 0 or less, enter 0. Enter this amount on your line 1E of your 1040, 1040 SR, or 1040 NR. Now we're going to circle back to your child and dependent care services. So if you did not receive dependent care benefits, you're going to proceed to Part 2 directly from Part 1. And this is where you enter the information about your qualifying person. If you have more than 3 qualifying persons, you'll need to refer to the instructions and check this box. But for each qualifying person, you'll enter their first name, last name, social security number, whether they were over the age of 12 and disabled. If that's the case, you'll check the appropriate box, and then you'll enter the total of qualified expenses incurred during the tax year. For line 3, you'll add the amounts in column D. Do not enter more than $3,000 for one qualifying person, or $6,000 if you had 2 or more persons. In line 4, you'll enter your earned income. If you're married filing jointly, you will enter your spouse's earned income in line 5. For everyone else, you'll simply carry down the figure from line 4. To determine what goes into line 6, you'll enter the smallest of 3, 4, or 5. And then on line 7, you'll enter the amount from your form 1040, 1040 SR, or 1040 NR, line 11. On line 8, you'll enter the decimal amount that applies to the amount on line 7. So if you carried over a number on line 7 that was $28,000, you would look into this table and you would see that your decimal amount is 0.28, and that is the number that would go here in box 8. For line 9A, you'll simply multiply the number on line 6 by the decimal amount that you determined on line 8. If you paid prior year expenses in the tax year you're completing this form for, you'll also need to complete the worksheet A located in the form instructions. You'll enter the amount from line 13 of that worksheet into line 9B. If this is not the case, enter 0, then go to line 9C. 9C, you'll simply total 9A, 9B to get to 9C. So if 9B was 0, 9C should be the same as 9A. For line 10, this is the tax liability limit. You'll enter the amount from the credit limit worksheet located in the form instructions. And finally, you'll determine the credit for child and dependent care expenses by entering the smaller of line 9C or line 10 here in line 11. You'll also carry this number to Schedule 3 of your Form 1040, line 2. If you have any questions at all, you can refer to the article that we wrote. Simply go to our website, teachmepersonalfinance.com, type in IRS Form 2441 in the search bar to come to our full-length article on child independent care tax credit. Thank you.